I'd like to call to order our Planning Commission meeting for the month of December. And Ms. Reynolds, would you please give us a roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Daddy.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Dr. Curran. Here. Mr. Farrell.
Here.
Ms. Hennessy.
Here.
Mr. Allen.
Here.
Ms. Kay.
Here.
Thank you. We'll start with the approval of minutes, and we have minutes to approve for the month of September as well as October. So we'll take September 1st, and do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second? And now we'll open it for comments or any changes or additions or anything for the month of September.
One tiny thing, Petra, under adjournment, Mr. Capelli made a motion to adjourn the meeting at 3 something. That,
At 3 something?
and that timing is, could be corrected.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was snoozing by then.
Gee, I can't imagine why. I made it all the way to the very last sentence. No, I already
That's
said.
all I somebody's done.
All right, well, thank you, Madeline. Any other comments for our September minutes? If not, all those in.
October minutes.
Oh, so we'll go to October, do September 1st.
Yeah.
So,
September, I did give Petra some changes, grammatical changes to the last full paragraph on page 6,
okay,
before the section adjournment.
and Petra, you have those changes? Any other comments? All those in favor of approving the September minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's move on. Do I have a motion for approval of the October minutes?
To move?
And a second? Thank you. Comments regarding October? Andy?
I have none.
Okay. No comments. Okay. All those in favor of approving the October minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? They are approved. Public comments regarding our agenda today, which is on our tree preservation. Alex?
Alex Fernandez, 418 Snow Egret. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, it's a good day to see this finally come to fruition after a long time and a lot of discussion. So I want to thank you and congratulate you for eventually, now going up to the stage of presenting it to the council, to the town council. I like the idea of this phased implementation. I think it's a good thing for the community. I do have a question with reference to the second item on that. It's determining a grace period for projects already advancing permitting. Do we have a list of permitting? Is it, the obvious question is going to be, will the permitting be any of the beach walker projects? I don't believe they're in the permitting project, but in the permitting process, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think that would be my only question with that. But again, congratulations and thank you, and hopefully the council will get this implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Any other comments from our residents, public? Okay, if not, I'd like to go to old business. And Mr. Taylor, if you'll walk us through our agenda today, please.
Yes, so today our only agenda item is our landscape and tree preservation ordinance. I'm going to go through just briefly sort of how we got to where we are today, and then do some high-level takeaways of the draft ordinance. And then once I do that, we'll go through the process of looking through if there are requested amendments or changes to the actual language in the text. As you all know, we've been working on this this year. We started early in the year in the first quarter. We took a sort of a great pause. As you all know, we paused to kind of focus on the ending of the 2013 development agreement and picked back up in October, essentially the last quarter of this year. And so the landscape and tree preservation ordinance was something that was birthed so that the town has some its own protections regarding tree removal. We know that it is in our purview to be able to establish those standards, which the state gives us the ability to do that. And this would essentially complement some of the existing standards in place that are very minimal in our current code. Trees provide a number of benefits that all of you are aware of, from habitat to shade to being adding aesthetic value, buffering, sound protection, et cetera, screening. And we want to be able to ensure that that is the livelihood of Kiowa, as we know, designing with nature. And so as we went through this particular draft and forming this ordinance, a number of things were considered, and primarily where we landed on is establishing a subcommittee of the Planning Commission to sort of be the driver group responsible for bringing forth a recommendation for the full commission to study and then provide ultimately on to town council. And as part of that, these were essentially the biggest components that subcommittee began with, looking at designing with nature. That document is really a blueprint for success on Kiowa, of how landscape has been treated over time since Kiowa's inception. Being able to really consider our Grow Native program here with the town and promoting native plants, native trees that help our species here. And then ultimately looking at how this would be applied to different areas, so whether it's single family, rights of way, multifamily, different developments or different neighborhoods, those things were considered in context. So ultimately, how did we get here? I mentioned the subcommittee, and one thing that we realized in the beginning is breaking this down into two components. That first being tree preservation standards and landscaping standards. Today before us are only the first phase of that recommendation, which would be the tree preservation standards. And at a later date, we'll decide how to best introduce landscaping standards for the town moving forward. The ordinance structure, we looked at a number of issues that were relevant to the Kiowa community, pulled into context a number of adjacent and other communities across the country, and looking at existing community concerns of the overall permitting process and timeline, staff resources and implementation. All those things were factors in our of how we got to where we are today with the draft. I must also mention, you see the last two components there, the ordinance implication analysis and as well as design community input. Those are tremendous factors of where we've landed today with the help of Kiowa Island Architecture Review Board, specifically Jennifer Hayes, who's the landscape coordinator, was a great resource to our subcommittee and providing sort of the implications of what the ordinance would do if in effect. And then, as you all know, the last month we've had several workshops and we've heard from a number of, a whole number of professionals. We noticed over 275 different businesses or companies who are registered with the town with a business license, whether they're a landscape architect, an architect, a builder. We had a handful of them who really were instrumental, I think, in providing some substantive comments to the commission, and we're appreciative of those comments. And so November 8th, 18th, and the 29th, we held workshops that led us to where we are today for our planning commission to ultimately make a recommendation to council. So that's kind of where we began and how we got to where we are. What I'm going to do now is just go through the overall ordinance and what's before you, break it down just at a high level, some of the substantive changes that you may have seen since our last workshop, and then entertaining questions, I think, and then we can go forth in the sort of potentially red line or making amendments. So this question kept coming back when we got calls from either architects or design teams. So I wanted to just reassure as part of this process of why we're doing this or what's the purpose of this. We got a lot of questions of, don't we already have an ARB? Why does the town need to begin to do tree removal processes? And so really it's just providing consistency for the town to be able to have some of those control measures. Today, the town does not have any of those control measures. So that was one of the primary reasons for us establishing this ordinance, for the town to have its own tree preservation control measure. And essentially, just as or in complement to the Architectural Review Board's long history of being a good steward of trees and environmental landscapes, et cetera, the town wants to be able to still continue that absent of wherever the ARB may be in the future. And so this is an effort that we took seriously, being able to look at best practices from professionals and being able to make sure that tree care is provided from the town's perspective. So that I just wanted to reassure, and this is put into our actual ordinance, what's the purpose in the beginning and the purpose and intent section.
John, a question on the third line here, you talk about all properties. As drafted, it's inconsistent with the proposal now. Is that just an oversight, or which is right?
So the purpose of the ordinance is to apply to every property within a town. So that captures that, the intent for it to capture all properties.
But again, it's not that's not consistent with the draft as we're looking at it.
So twofold, the purpose and intent is not necessarily the applicability section. So the purpose and intent is really for us to look at tree preservation across the entire island, but the applicability section will tell us exactly which properties would be or exempt, et cetera.
But you say the regulations covers all properties, landscaping and tree preservation covers all properties. As drafted, it's not consistent with the draft.
So
All I'm asking is which is the right answer? Is it supposed to be all properties, or is it as drafted?
So all properties refers to the purpose of the ordinance. The purpose of the ordinance is for us, the town, to look at all properties. How we are going to apply the ordinance is to look at specific properties. So if the question is which supersedes, it's going to be the applicability in the general sense that if there is a question about does this ordinance affect me and my property, you're going to look to that applicability section and make that determination.
So you'll, in the future, just amend this?
So in the future, we're not amending the purpose and intent. We would just be amending the applicability section in the future, opposed to changing the purpose of the ordinance. If there was a consideration for us to apply now, based on how it's written, single-family residential.
Yeah, right now, our intent was to, after listening to the feedback from all the people that came to the workshops and, provided the subcommittee with information, we made the determination that our initial go-around should be for non-single-family homes.
So it doesn't apply to all properties?
It does. I think what John is saying is the intent overall. We want to protect trees on the whole island. This first bit of the ordinance just applies to non-single-family homes. So I think you just have a nomenclature issue with how he's phrasing it.
John, would we expect to come back again and do another ordinance or a revision of this to cover single-family properties?
As part of the recommendation from the subcommittee is that sometime in the future, we would anticipate single-family being applicable. That date or timeline has not been determined. There's a number of factors that were discussed. What the status of the Architectural Review Board, does the town establish it? We know that that transition from the current state, I think it's just a number of factors that at some point, either the commission can say, hey, we're ready for that, or town council can direct the commission and say, hey, we're ready for that.
So then the purpose allows us to come back in the future to address single families.
Correct.
Not necessarily have to do it now, but we can come back.
Correct.
Yeah, we felt the ARB currently, with their procedures, was doing a good job with single-family homes. So we're going to leave that be and wait to see. And as of yesterday, there's new information on the transition of the ARB. It's looking like it's headed toward KICA. So we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out to determine if and when the town needs to do anything about single-family homes.
So that's a future kind of decision, but today I think it's really looking at everything that's non-single family. Yeah.
Right now, the ARB doesn't do anything with single-family homes after they're developed, except to approve tree removal. Is that correct? It's not.
No.
What do you do with single-family homes? Sorry? No, after the home is built, occupied, if we don't prune our trees, is there anything the ARB does?
Yes.
You send them a letter.
Well, what she's saying is there are additional things that they do, correct?
Yes, the ARB standards and guidelines apply to a property, single-family home, prior to development and post-development.
All right, let me ask it a different way. Is designing with nature in any way specific to single-family developed properties?
Is it specific?
He's asking if you control developed properties, and you're saying, yes, you do have procedures for
Yes.
developed properties.
Yes.
What about undeveloped properties?
Yes.
So it's okay to leave an undeveloped lot, go without any landscaping or without any tree removal?
Yes.
But yet it's not to do it in a single-family home?
Andy, where are you headed with this?
I'm getting to the point where, unlike the last time we were presented with an ordinance to change something, the true objective of that presentation and that ordinance, when approved, was to use as a wedge to get somebody to do something that was perceived to be the best approach in an instance, with the intent that the regulation would change if the other party, if you will, conceded to the views of the people who were objecting to certain parts of a plan that was submitted.
I don't think we're here to judge the intent. We're here to look at make a recommendation and what the intent is. I can't judge the intent. I mean,
I'm trying to judge the intent of putting anything in here about all properties.
there's no difference between how it's written here or we've got a section that has an exemption. So it's all properties except. So it's no
It
different.
doesn't say that. It says all properties. In the
But the
second line.
applicability, under applicability,
Yeah.
it's all properties with these exceptions, and it's accepted out for there.
It would be interesting, and I think council might want to think about this and prepare for it, because I'm sure there'll be a challenge from single-family homeowners as to whether or not your jurisdiction in the town, other than health, welfare, and safety, you might, through a stretch, get the safety recommendation in tree removal to extend, but I don't know where health and welfare comes in, the landscaping, and to tree removal.
Andy, we looked at a lot of ordinances in other towns, and many towns have tree ordinances. This
I'm
is
not suggesting they don't have tree
And
ordinances.
it applies to single-family developed homes.
In what town?
Oh, gosh, we talked about Lake Forest, Illinois.
There's,
There are lots of
Did it
towns.
do more than tree removal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Somerville, Hilton Head, where else did we go? Greenville. We
And
looked at all
it
those.
pertained to people who were in a developed property and didn't change it.
Again, I'm still trying to understand what are you trying to get us to do here?
I'm trying to understand what this intention of this regulation is, to do all properties?
This intention is to guide the maintenance and control of trees on Kiowa.
I think Andy might be heading down the path of, what if an undeveloped property doesn't do anything to trim, and what if a developed property doesn't do anything to trim? And we're not trying to legislate that. If they don't want to trim it, that's fine. If it wants to become overgrown, that's fine right now. Only thing we're looking at is thinking about designing with nature. We don't want them to over trim it now so that it looks like a cornfield. So we're trying to prevent over trimming, but not trying to incentivize or prevent people from not trimming their trees or bushes, developed or undeveloped, single family.
I'm also concerned that it's overreach to write a regulation that pertains to a person's basically property rights, one that pertains to the right of an individual to do as they wish with their own property. Trees are private property.
Andy, we're already doing that. We're doing that in terms of lot coverage. You're preventing somebody from lot coverage. You're preventing them from building a building too high. These are single family.
Facts,
So there's setback requirements, all of these, there are requirements that prevent people from doing something that's that's inconsistent with what happens with
Talking
Kiowa.
about developing, not, you're talking about developing a property, I'm talking about after it's been developed.
After it's developed, when you remodel, if you're over the lot coverage.
That's development.
ARB wants you to.
That's development.
No, redevelop it.
No,
If you want
it's
to tear your deck
changing.
down and change it, that's redevelopment. So
Redevelopment
if you
is
want to,
development.
if you want to shrink it, you have to shrink it inconsistent with what the lot coverage is today. So that's already covered too.
If the intent of this is to eventually slip in the fact that you're going to cover everybody's property with something that technically, and I think we may get a confirmation legally, is not permissible or not, it should be prohibited, is a question. Why would we want to do that if ultimately it can't be enforced?
So I just want to step back and reiterate, the slide I just pulled in front of you guys is where we are, how and why that we can establish landscaping and tree preservation standards as a town. So this would be, we would just set the metrics and how those particular standards are applied, but this does give us the purview to establish those standards. What the commission has done so far, the subcommittee has done so far, is look at as wide as we probably can go and what's most appropriate to where we are today and how we apply this ordinance. So in the beginning stages of this process, we considered all those things, landscaping, and we kind of narrowed it down to essentially saying, right now, the most appropriate thing for Kiowa in our context today is to only apply this ordinance to non-single family residential
All right, when we get to the draft, I'll give you some changes that I believe will let you do that without having to specify that at this time, it applies to all properties. Minor changes, but it gets to the point where you are writing a regulation that applies to, as you say, multifamily and residential.
So,
or
Andy-
non-single family
So Andy,
residential.
I believe that we will vote on the draft as, whether we want to recommend it to town council. You have a vote if we don't strike, the coverage issue you're worried about, you can vote against it.
It's not the question.
But you can vote against it.
If I heard the chairman right at the last meeting, we had no opportunity at that time to make comments on the individual draft. We were told we would get that opportunity today. I have comments on the individual draft, and I'd like to go through them to achieve what I believe is a clearer presentation of what the purpose of the intent of this draft is, not a future draft.
So once I go through this introductory presentation and we get to actually looking at the ordinance, once there's a motion to adopt this recommendation, followed by that is recommended motions that can amend. And so you can amend.
No, John, that is exactly the point. And we fell into this trap the last time when we talked about the Beachwalker properties. I don't want to have a motion on the floor that's going to be voted on or needs to be amended. I want to be able to give comments on the draft to see if we want to make changes before we go to a motion. There's no,
That's
there's
not-
been
there's
been no
opportunity for the-
discussion on this draft by the council. We listened to people, we asked questions, but there's been no discussion on this draft by the council,
I'd-
or the
I'd-
commission.
Commission?
by the commission.
I do think we should stick to the non-residential and not muddy the water with the residential, because we'll get to that bridge and cross it eventually. And I think if your comments, Andy, applies to the agenda.
Just that issue.
The agenda of the day, nothing residential, then yeah, you have the full right to voice those.
And I think John's right, the time for that. So I'll make a motion to accept this draft to forward on to town council.
But we're not there yet.
Not
Okay.
there.
Well,
I
okay.
want to
'cause-
review a few more things before we get
Okay.
there, yeah. So just to continuing, I think it's important to highlight since our workshop, essentially, what does this ordinance do if in effect? And some of the principles that were considered and how we got here. So number one, the town now would have tree preservation standards with mitigation requirements as an ordinance. And that's important in the purpose and intent behind this particular draft is that now the town has some of the responsibility of how we administer tree removal on the island. The second is that we've had a lot of discussion here already, is that the intent here is to only apply it to non-single-family residential developments. So if it's commercial, if it's a utility project, if it's a multifamily project, this is when this ordinance would kick in. So this would not apply to someone, a R1 single-family residential property. The third is that
Hey, John, just let me clarify then you see us going forward, there really isn't a time frame on an amendment or a revision to this for a single family?
I think there's an appropriate time for that to come back, but there's a lot of factors that are moving right now. And so I think the commission should just listen out and hear from council, hear from the community of when that appropriate time might be. But right now, I think as we've recommended is where I would.
I think, John, we deal with that in the next steps.
Yeah, and
We'll get
next
there in
step,
a
there's a
second.
number of things, yeah. This was important, I think, in our dialogue as we began with the subcommittee is realizing that if we were more restrictive than the Architecture Review Board, that would require a lot more impediment to the permitting process. And so we attempted to be less restrictive than the current standards and guidelines within the Architecture Review Board. But also just provide essentially a lot more flexibility and discretion with the planning director in the decisions of approval. This would exempt just normal tree maintenance and pruning. However, there's recommendations in here of where those best practices are based on ANSI standards. And so this would exempt just regular maintenance pruning. And then additionally, this introduces a new concept, I think, for the town is a tree preservation board, which this particular board would add another layer of review on heightened type of projects or relief from the actual standards. So if there was this particular case where some of the standards wanted to be relieved from, then that would actually go to this tree preservation board for review, and we'll walk through that a little later. We heard a great deal from the design community about avoiding duplication of process. And so through this particular draft ordinance, we had a lot of discussion of how this would be applied and making sure that what stages of development, that they're not duplicating the process and having to go through two separate processes, the town, ARB, whomever, and delaying construction. Similarly, that next said just ultimately not delaying the overall permitting process and timeline for projects to be built. We have some new terms in our zoning code, and then ultimately promoting Key West Grow Native initiative, and then ultimately we see this landing within our site plan review process today. So we have our current review of how we administer non-single family residential projects today, and so we would just add tree surveys, tree preservation plans, or landscape plans as a requirement based on this ordinance. I'll stop there because I think the next slide kind of addresses the process. And then actually now we can go through the actual ordinance if there are questions about the actual language and text.
I have one additional question on the last bullet point that you just referenced. One of the things we heard in the workshops was the potential delay of project approval. Do you see this having any kind of impact there?
So I'll just show you my slide then on what I added this. So this is not in your, not in your, so this is our site plan review process today. We go through a pre-application meeting with the applicant. After that pre-application meeting, or that pre-application meeting is for us to review essentially what's being proposed and give them guidance on the next steps of what should they be submitting or process being applied. So we would hear, hey, I want to build 3 new multifamily buildings or whatever project, and we would say, this are the steps that you would need to apply. These are the types of documents that you'll need to submit and for review. If there's a requirement for any other type of review body, then that's built into the section. So on that right-hand side, you see pre-application meeting, then it would actually make a formal submission. That formal submission is when all of those documents are submitted through our CitizenServe, our online portal. And from that stage is when the planning department begins to review that submission. We'll reach out to other stakeholders or agencies for review during the site plan review process. So whether that be Kiawah Island Utility, whether that be St. John's Fire, all of those other agencies and entities we review during this process. So to your question, Ms. Kay, the applicant would be submitting, the intent here is for the applicant to be submitting their tree preservation and tree landscape plans as part of this, with the hopeful that they would have already went through ARB for preliminary review in site walks with Jen at the ARB. So this would be at an earlier stage in the process. The zoning component to this. Once they get through zoning, they still would have to submit their actual formal building plans to our building department for review. So the intent here, and this might take some trial and error for us to get it precise, but the intent here is for they to be able to submit those tree preservation plans at the early stage during site plan review, get zoning approval, then be able to begin that site clearing, and then by the time they have building approval, that would just go to our building department for building plans. So if there are questions now, Mr. Chair, now might be the appropriate time to put a motion on the floor and then have discussion about the actual language. If there are outside questions or general questions that I have not.
Yeah, you had the next steps in there. I think just put it in context.
Okay, I'll do that. So where we are today is a recommendation. We have scheduled January 9th. We haven't advertised it yet, but January 9th, we've potentially have slated for the public hearing for this with town council, which would be in the new year, our first meeting of the new year. So the next steps really is for this phased implementation. Right now, as written, this would only apply to non-single family residential. In Kiawah's future, staff's recommendation that it should be applied to single family or some other components of this ordinance should be able to be applied. So maybe not it's the full gamut that's listed here, but there are elements, I think, that single family residential development should have tree removal standards. So figuring out what might be that appropriate time, I'm here to listen to what might be suggestions, and what I would hope to entail is that when we make a recommendation to council, we've provided council with this might be where you guys consider just some factors of when might be that appropriate time. Fair?
Yeah, John, so non-single family residential, trying to understand, proposed future time where single family residential would apply. So, okay, so I'm reading this wrong. It now applies to multifamily residential and commercial and resort and utility. Okay, sorry.
Right.
Thank you.
And then, so the second bullet there that Mr. Fernandez actually doing public comment, sort of determining a grace period. We heard during the workshops of projects that are currently permitted today, not even fully permitted, but going through the particular process with ARB, to not necessarily have them be caught up in when this particular ordinance comes into effect, because they would have already started the formal permitting process, even though it's outside of the town's citizen served portal of review. So the example that I gave is when we did the new standards for our base building height elevation based on the new FEMA maps that came in 2021. What we did was all those particular projects that had already begun ARB's process, we used that as the date as cutoff of when that new ordinance would take effect. And so those projects that had already began design work did not necessarily have to be penalized of the effective date of the new standards of that new height standard of the new FEMA flood maps. So it's not exempting anyone unnecessarily, but it's just really giving those who have already put a valued effort into that permitting and design process to move us forward. We felt it also important that the design teams to be aware of the standards, even though they've been a part of the work sessions, to educate not only the design teams, but also our property owners on the new standards. And so at some date, once this becomes effective, scheduling an open house, and we've done this in the past where we send an invite to that number of lists, and we just have them ask questions like, hey, during the permitting process, so that they're aware when they're talking to their property owners and clients, they can inform them of these are the changes that are now in effect. So it's just really an education effort. We'll push this out to our communication channels of this new ordinance, but it's really just making sure that people are aware that we have a new tree preservation standard for the town. And then the final component to this, which I think, based on, I don't know if Ms. Hennessy or Ms. Kay said, based on yesterday's news, how potential landscape standards we might consider just having our subcommittee work again and put their thoughts around it again and continue that way. We have the anticipation that we will be bringing on a consultant in the new year to help us look at our entire zoning code, so maybe that's another avenue for them to look at landscaping. But I would want us to kind of ideally figure out the next stage of what might be appropriate landscaping standards that we fold in. So those are the next steps. Other questions about where we go next after this?
Again, to understand exactly where you're going, you read these two things, you're not looking for anything other than a time to propose that this draft regulation covers single-family homes. I mean, this fait accompli. You're saying you're going to propose a time when it would comply.
We're going to recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
That's
going to
not
recommend the
proposing.
time.
That's recommending.
Yeah, so that
So
recommend.
not if it complies, but when it complies, when they would have to comply.
So I mean, it could be if, but we would want to have a timeline or at least a recommendation to say, we think single family should be included. The only reason it was not included because we have an effective process today. And so if that effective process still remains, maybe it does not apply in the future. But based on the comments that we heard, single family residential and the design teams that are working on the island, they love the process that works today. And so the subcommittee felt that not to impede on that particular process that's working very well, and maybe at a future there's a different changing the guard or whatever those factors may be, that we revisit and say now single family needs to be.
With all due respect to design teams and the subcommittee that worked on this, I would suggest that before you ask the planning commission, whoever's on it, whenever it happens, that before you throw something out that imposes a regulation where it legally may not be acceptable to do so, that you get a legal opinion and it be clear what you are able to do with respect to single-family homes, with respect to landscaping and call it tree preservation or
Prior to adoption,
whatever.
we will make sure that this is a legally buttoned-up document, so.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
I said prior to this being fully executed, we will make sure that it is a legally sound document ordinance.
Fully executed means that you get it before it's approved, before you implement this and apply it to single-family homes.
What I was saying, before it becomes in effect, whether it's including or not including single-family, we would make sure, I'm just covering the legal basis question of whether it's legal or not.
So until you get that, I'm suggesting that there should be no intent to have this apply to single-family homes based on some time frame that you're going to decide.
There isn't anything that's in this ordinance that would be legally challenged, in my opinion,
It
based on
says
what's
it.
in
It says it would comply with the ordinance. The language you're using here and in the earlier part is inconsistent with the changes you made in the document. That's why I want to clean up the document, at least to get it to the point where you're not going to be dealing with something you can't
So
enforce.
if your question is changing in the purpose intent instead of using all properties and joint to non-single family, that's a simple fix that we can make.
I
if
agree,
that-
that's
if
what I want to do.
So that was different from, I thought.
That's what I'm suggesting. But I'm suggesting with respect to that, at the time you do decide that you may want to apply this to single-family homes, you have a legal opinion in your pocket that says you can.
Okay, fair enough, and John said he would, so
Okay?
move on.
So if there, I think it'd be more appropriate if there's questions about the actual ordinance itself, to answer those questions before we go into any dialogue. So if there's questions, I mean, I can go through the entire document if you would like, or if there's things that you've already highlighted that you want specific questions about, I'll answer them. If not, then I think a motion would be.
Do you want to do that as discussion after a motion, or are you looking to do it before a motion?
No, so I was asking if there were general questions about any of any general questions, and then any comments, we would have to do it through a motion. So any,
All right, in that case, I have a question. In the first two lines, would you accept the change that deletes the language "for all properties within"? So it now reads, "The purpose of these regulations is to provide tree preservation and landscaping standards within the town of Kiowa Island."
so that's more of an amendment, so I would just post a question. So I would say if that's it, we can do that through motion and then begin to amend the document.
All right, I move that we accept this document for recommendation to the town council.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
So
Discussion.
discussion.
Discussion first. Any discussion, comments?
So now, Mr.
regarding that
Capelli,
motion.
Mr. Capelli, you can.
I would like to propose an amendment to that motion that suggests we add language or delete language that's misleading with respect to the document in a number of places as to its intent and the coverage with respect to properties on Kiowa. And I have a few specific proposals that I'd like for you to consider. If you want them all now, we can vote on them individually, or we can vote on them as a group,
Why don't we do them one at a time?
one at a time.
Yeah, because that way we,
Fine.
in case we agree
Yeah.
with some or don't
All
agree
right,
with some.
so my first amendment would be to eliminate the words "for all properties"
That sounds fine.
in the first and second line of the document.
So it would read, "The purpose of these regulations is to provide tree preservation and landscaping standards within the town of Kiowa, blah, blah."
And
So you wanna
landscaping
take
standards
out-
within the town of
Want
Kiowa
to take
Island.
out "for all properties." You want to take out those three words. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I don't have do you have a problem with that? I don't have a problem.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. We can go ahead and vote on that now?
Is there any, does anybody
Gotta vote on that.
disagree?
If you want to vote on each one, you got to vote on it.
I think,
I guess I'm not sure what's the difference, you know, why do you feel that this is maybe challenged legally for single family, but not for multifamily?
At this point, the way this is drafted, I don't believe it is consistent with the legal rights of an individual property owner.
I'd have to disagree with you there. I worked on
Not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer.
But I worked on a blight ordinance. Talk about affecting individual property owners. You're seriously affecting individual property owners. So
As
I
far
think
as
there
what's
is a
in
lot
the-
of precedent.
As
And
far
maybe
as what's in the document, in terms of lot clearing and in terms of, except for the one section dealing with pruning of trees, it essentially deals with new development and not developed properties.
Mr.
And I
Wilson,
want to
maybe
make
you
it
should
clear
help
that
us.
it's not.
So if we change that, then you're going to have to go down to applicability and exemptions where we say,
I have a change in that line also.
and I think these are unnecessary changes, because as written, I think the regulation stands on its own.
No, because in number one, on the bottom of that page, you talk about the applicability again, applying to all real properties within the municipal limits.
With the exception.
Excluding
When you get
single-family
there.
residential developments, except otherwise as expressly
All you have to
exempted.
do, instead of changing it, talk to what it applies to, not what it doesn't apply to. So what I would suggest is it says, the provisions of the article apply to all non-single-family residential properties within the municipal limits.
But that's not our intent.
And strike the last portion of that sentence, except as.
But that's not at this point, it's not the recommendation of the
Because you
subcommittee.
want to include single-family homes at some point.
We want the possibility.
That's
to be
right.
determined-
And I'm saying that
don't
should
want it.
not be part of this.
Okay, I disagree.
Okay?
Can we ask
There's
Mr. Wilson, you've read the ordinance. In your opinion, are we on legal grounds with what we're doing here? I think that's Andy's saying we're not. We thought we were. We think we are.
I'm not aware of any problems with it, but I have not been asked to research that issue. But I am not aware of any way that this tree ordinance impinges on rights. Of course, you know, any ordinance can be applied in such a manner to impact the rights, right? If it were to completely prohibit the development of a lot, that would be subject to some legal doubt. But I mean, I don't know what else I can say other than that. I mean, again, I have not sat down and done a review to see if there are any tree ordinances out there that have been found to be unconstitutional or a violation of property rights, so to speak. But I'm not aware of any.
There's plenty of them out there.
There are plenty.
That is very
There are
true.
a dozen, so.
And I mean, they've been, what comes to my mind is Sullivan's Island has gone through
Sure.
a great deal of litigation over, and it's over pruning, in fact, of the maritime forest that's grown between the houses and the beachfront. And, I mean, it's more or less been upheld. So
The pruning?
the ordinance is
ordinance.
governing, prohibiting, or regulating the pruning of the maritime forest.
And it was upheld.
Has been upheld.
It hadn't been found unconstitutional or
Andy-
Different
unenforceable.
issue, because you're talking about maritime forest and a prohibition against taking out the understory of a maritime, or trees in a maritime forest to preserve something else,
I
erosion.
agree with Larry. I believe, you know, the intent of this was not to impose anything that's more restrictive than the ARB. I mean, there's been lots of work done, and again, you know, multiple conversations, multiple checks, that nothing in here is more restrictive than what the ARB is asking.
And I'm not saying it is. All I'm saying is that the way it's written is inconsistent within itself as to what applies and what doesn't apply.
I think, why don't we call for a vote on this?
That's, okay. Well, we have a motion, Joanne,
You know, just to get it out there, yeah.
yeah. We had a motion and a second, and your motion was to, repeat that, please?
Well, and I'm not even sure in listening to this if I want to.
Motion was to strike language.
There's a motion on the floor, and then we have an amendment to remove section of the first sentence, all properties. So it would read, the purpose of these regulations is to provide tree preservation and landscape standards within the town of Kiawah Islands, continued.
Okay.
That's the motion on the floor right now.
And we had a second. So now we can call for all those in favor of approving that amendment language, correct? Okay. All those in favor of approving that amendment language, say aye.
All right.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed?
How many opposed? Raise your hand so we can count. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it failed.
You can continue with other.
I have an amendment that I'd like to recommend, and I apologize for not saying this to you last week, John. In the section on page 10, under mitigation standards, number 1,
Hold on, let's get there first. Page 10. Okay,
mitigation standards, number 1, I think the number 20 trees per acre is too small. It's too low. When you do the calculations, it allows, and I apologize, it's like 40 feet between each tree, once you exclude a 33% building area. So I think the number 20 is too low. I think a number more like 50 or 60. And at 50 or 60, 60 gives you a 20-foot spacing per tree in the non-footprint area. So I think, and I just did a simple count on my lot. It's 2/3 of an acre, and I have 50 trees in the non-footprint area in 2/3 of an acre.
Okay, well, let me,
Other municipalities had anywhere from 40 to 60.
yeah, but let me say, I think this is one where we wanted to make sure that we were less, required less than the ARB. So if you,
Okay.
so I'm assuming that the ARB has a standard. I don't remember what it is, Jen.
It's actually, we increased, so the last part of this went from 50% to 70% to again to be consistent with the ARBs.
Okay,
We changed DBH to number.
So the last sentence means that beginning with the site plan, that 70% of the trees need to be present after development. So starting with the number of trees before development, we want to see 70% either preserved or mitigated.
after the house is built.
After development.
But that's 70% of the diameter.
Yeah, didn't we
It's not
change it
70% of the
to-
number.
Yeah, didn't we change that, John, at the
We
subcommittee?
changed 70 in the actual chart. Maybe that was just oversight if we.
Yeah, it
if-
wasn't supposed to be combined DBH, it was 70% of the number of trees.
Right.
So
Because
to-
we said DBH was going to get to,
So
Yeah.
does that assist in if that changes 70? But I just want to add 2 things
70%
here.
of the number, I would be agreeable to that.
yeah, that's what we had made that change, it just didn't get in here.
And again, John explained this as, this is a preferred minimum
Yeah.
density.
So Mr. Kern kind
Okay,
of
I
added
get-
to that. This is a preferred density. One of the comments that we did here is the survival of tree rates based on trees overshadowing each other. And so this kind of plays into that of allowing some discretion of too many trees actually could be unhealthy and so.
I understand.
the only check we should make is make sure that we're consistent, at least equal to, if not more, lenient than the ARB.
So we changed from 50% to 70% to be consistent with the ARB
But we also changed DBH to number of.
number.
Numbers, so
Yeah,
the-
that
so by
has to be
changing the number of
changed.
trees instead of DBH would get us
Correct.
consistent, okay.
Yeah. Do we need to make, is that just a typo there? Do we need a motion on that?
It was supposed to be in there, so I think we can just say that that was a typo. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we're going to strike DBH and make that number of trees.
Yeah.
Number of trees, okay.
Thank you. If
think
you're going
in-
to look at it as a typo, then I'll withdraw my recommendation.
Okay.
In one of the comment letters, there's a question, actually pointed out that the use of caliper and DBH in some cases might be inconsistent. And when we're talking about DBH, it's really where is it?
Diameter,
The standard in the nursery, and if you're going to put 70 small trees together to remediate something else, by the time they grow up, you're going to have a lot that's going to have 50 trees that need to be torn down. I don't think you can measure it on that basis going in when you don't know what the ultimate possibility of growth on those trees is.
But Andy, we just struck DBH.
No, we're not doing,
We just struck DBH.
Just
yeah,
struck
that's a
it.
typo. We had changed it to number of trees, and I think Jen
Caliper-
told us the only time caliper is
Caliper
used
is
is
the
on new
nursery-
is on new construction. She
new, yeah.
corrected us on that when we were,
Caliber is the
Caliber would apply to.
Newly planted trees.
Newly planted trees.
only newly planted trees. She said that's the only time.
which is used to measure in a nursery, is what the
Right, but
comment
we're
letter said.
only, when we're mitigating, we're doing number of trees, except for specimen trees. We do DBH on specimen trees, because if you take down a 24-inch live oak, we want to make sure you plant, 4 or 6-inch live oaks. But other than that, we just went number of trees, and we eliminated pines and palms, because there's no way you could put enough trees on a lot once you build a house. So we think we covered that.
I understand that, but I think the point is that if we're using a standard that is generally used to define nursery trees, and we're asking for more, we don't know what the ultimate coverage
not.
is going to be in that lot.
We're not asking for DBH on mitigation, we're asking for number of trees.
Caliper is the term used.
Where do you see caliper?
So let me review the mitigation.
In the
stack.
ordinance, do you see it in the ordinance?
So if you pull to the actual chart, table 4J, that last column is the mitigation standard. To Ms. Hennessy's point, the only time that we would require DBH mitigation standards are for specimen trees, but all the other requirements should be the number of actual trees being removed, and that would be 70%. So on that far right column, for example, where you see protected trees of 8 inches or greater, the mitigation would be those trees that are replanted must equal to 70% of the total quantity of the removed trees, and that's with the discretion of the planning director, and then 70% being native species. So there isn't a requirement for inch to inch in the mitigation.
Okay.
John, I just had the one I mentioned to you earlier, is that number 2 under required permit on page 2. Yeah, just for consistency, A says no, we say we should not cut down protected tree, and then removal of protected or specimen tree. I think for consistency, we should say protected or specimen tree in A.
You want to make that a motion, Adam?
I move that we add, we modify A under required permitted tree to read abuse any protected or specimen tree.
Second.
Second. Okay, any comments?
In this case, I'm going to object because I think it's an inconsistent or unnecessary change.
Okay, any other comments?
In some respects, all protected trees all specimen trees are protected.
Yeah, I know when we go back, because the diameter makes it, but just for the language, just to make sure that we're consistent with the language.
You want consistent language there, but not elsewhere.
Okay, we've had our comments. Okay, all those in favor of approving this change, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
Okay, we got one, okay.
So if there aren't any other amendments, then we could make say it again, essentially, vote on the ordinance as amended, yeah, if there aren't any other suggestions, changes.
I'd like to make an amendment on page 3, C1. The last line on C1, remove the word "and" with respect to the opinion of a certified arborist, and substitute the word "or."
Jen, could you weigh in on that? I know we discussed this, I don't remember what you said. I know we talked about this in the subcommittee. Is that okay, Mr. Chair, that I ask it her?
Yeah.
It was an opinion brought up by an arborist.
Either I think Bartlett brought this up in their comments, saying that tree removal is really a very important tactic of how that tree could be survived, and the level of certification should be make sure that that anyone isn't just removing or pruning trees inappropriately. And so that was one of the standards that he recommended, that all anyone who make an assessment for a tree that is hazardous or being removed, that they have that credential.
So a certified arborist he didn't think was enough?
He didn't.
he didn't do
He
it.
didn't think that that was enough.
Because he was a track arborist, as I recall.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the question really is, do you want him, this is both. We'd have to have a certified arborist and a tree risk assessment qualified
Right,
arborist.
right.
Do you want them both, or just would just the,
or, you're
Or is
saying
Andy
put
is
in
saying
or?
or?
yeah.
That makes sense, because that's a big burden to
Yeah.
have to get both.
I think so, too.
I'd be happy with or.
It's just a different level of qualification, so maybe it's written a little bit, could be written a little more precise, so it's still a certified arborist with a higher level of credentials.
Sure.
And
If
is,
you were gonna change it, you
Well, you-
just remove the certified arborist and leave.
The tree risk, the track, yeah.
Right. the-
or you could put, or Ron, you could put with in there and say certified arborist with the tree qualifying something or other, that he has that qualification also. I don't know.
is that qualification necessary to determine if a tree is dead? And this, I'm out of my knowledge. I don't know if Tommy would know. If somebody, I mean, to me, you look at a tree and it's dead, I guess it's diseased, irreparably damaged, hazardous. Some of these things would be obvious to a layman. Is, for purposes of this section, how high a qualification is really needed so that we don't overburden the person who it's affecting?
Become a certified tree arborist, then there are certain classifications beyond that that you can achieve, this being one. So what you're saying is it's one and the same to have a risk assessment qualified arborist because he's already been a qualified arborist and a certified arborist.
So the question is, do we need that higher level of certification for this particular application? I don't have an opinion.
I certainly don't think we
on that.
need both.
No, I don't.
Definitely
don't
don't
need
need both.
So do we need, so the question is, do we just say certified arborist, which would include the second point, or do we need that higher level for this particular application? My instinct is no, but I'm not a tree person. I would, I don't know if we need that extra level to say, yeah, your tree's dead.
I mean, that was only one
It
person's
would-
comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
That's not
so,
something that we've heard multiple times.
so maybe we just eliminate the last, just in the opinion of a certified arborist.
Period.
And eliminate "and tree risk assessment" or.
Right, just certified arborist, period.
Period.
And if we
I
all
don't
agree
think
on
that
that,
accomplishes what the comment was. The comment
was
was
just one
that
comment.
it needed to be,
One comment by one person.
if one person, it's like a doctor who specializes, who's an MD, who then gets a license to do cardiac surgery, but the fact is he's a cardiac surgeon and a surgeon. You only want a cardiac surgeon to operate on your heart.
I think I'm happy with certified
So
arborist,
I'll just
period.
read the comment that was received from Bartlett, so you have some context in it. So it was referencing this particular section, references to opinions of a certified arborist regarding tree removal based on the opinion of a certified arborist. And the suggestion is that adding the tree risk assessment qualified arborist, assessing tree risk goes beyond basic certification and require additional training and qualification. So this was more about tree risks opposed to the health of a tree, based on reading that.
Right.
So it's,
So,
I don't have an opinion here. I would lean on either.
Well, what I'm hearing is Andy said "or," and then our group agrees and have come to the conclusion of just saying certified arborist, period, and eliminate the "and" tree risk assessment.
Yeah, somebody who's better qualified to do it than
Yeah.
just a certified arborist.
So if we agree on that, do we even need to have a motion for amendment?
Yeah, you do, because we're amending it.
Yeah, and, well, and Mr. Capelli would have to withdraw his motion.
Of the-
What you're talking about now.
Right, he would withdraw the word "or," replacing the word "and," and then we would go ahead and do a motion to accept the amendment to say just certified arborist, correct? Okay, Andy, will you withdraw that?
No, not necessarily. I think, or in this case, while it's I guess, a higher degree of qualification, if you will, I'm not so sure we need that higher qualification if you're talking about a tree removal on a developed lot that's a specimen tree. I mean, you might not even need the
So if-
certification, but you want to sign off by an arborist. Certified arborist should be qualified to do it.
So that was the motion that was recommended, to just stop at certified arborist and exclude the additional qualification.
I wouldn't take away the right of somebody to go get somebody who's more qualified if it's a grand tree.
So this wouldn't take away their rights.
No,
It's
they
just
would have
saying
the
that
right
we
to do
wouldn't-
it.
We wouldn't
Because
require
they're
it.
also
Believe it,
certified, these
the order leaves
guys,
the right to do it.
these tree risk, these track guys are also certified arborists. So we're
That's right.
not eliminating them.
That's right.
So just put a period after arborist and eliminate "and."
Joanne, what you're saying is you're eliminating the ability of an individual to get a more qualified person
No.
on his own property.
No,
What do you mean?
I'm not saying that at
No,
all.
Yeah,
we're
you
just,
are.
No.
bottom line is we don't want a guy that mows the grass determines whether the tree is dead.
Right.
So we're bringing in a certified arborist who has credentials that gives them a lot more authority, knowledge, and insight than anyone else on whether it's a property owner, builder, or whatever. So in my opinion, if it's a certified arborist, they can make a good decision 99 times out of 100.
so
Doesn't eliminate, if somebody wants to get, a second opinion from a track guy or a first.
Not a
they
second
can.
opinion. It's
Or
like,
an
it's
original.
like having a foot doctor operate on your heart.
So,
No.
we have,
Yes.
Andy has a motion to change "and" to "or."
That's correct.
We've had discussion on it. Why don't we just
I still have
vote
one
on
more,
that?
one more point of discussion.
One more point of discussion.
So, as I read this, if you simplify it, a permit's not required if a tree is dead and going to fall on your house. In the opinion of an arborist or a certified tree guy, could we insert tree is dead, permit's not required, the tree's dead, going to fall on your house, in the opinion of the planning director or a certified arborist or a tree assessment guy? There's times when you don't need an arborist to tell you, I mean, John can, there's some cases he might say, I can see this is going to fall on your house. Or he might say, it's close, why don't we get somebody in?
Well, I mean, somebody's got to cut it down, right? So,
And an arborist won't cut it down with, nobody's going to cut it down without an arborist saying.
But this is,
they just have to send notification to John.
So there's, let me backtrack, because Mr. Farrell presented some context here. The purpose of the certified arborist is just so that we put the burden on the property owner to provide us with whether or not they want to have a tree removed or not. There is a section in the ordinance that we won't require a permit if it's something that's hazardous and they just need to get that tree out. We just want documentation of that. So they would just be essentially informing the town that, hey, this tree needs to be removed, take pictures and send it to the town. But for this particular section of whether or not the qualifications should be a certified arborist, I'm going to have the opinion that we should have someone who's certified to make that decision whether or not this tree should be removed or not just any person.
Isn't that required to remove the tree anyhow?
It is by the,
Yeah, based on how it's written today, yes, yeah.
John, do you know where that is in here?
No, that is this section. So this section is for, under hazardous conditions. They
So-
don't need to get a permit, they just need to send a letter that has some photos and.
Let me try to simplify it a little bit. So if you have a tree on your property that's dead, diseased, dying, or hazardous, what this is saying, we're not requiring a permit for that. The only thing that's required is that you need to make sure that that person who's certified to determine that that tree is hazardous or dying so that's the only requirement. So,
You don't want the burden of saying, yeah, that's fine. You want somebody else to say,
Correct.
yeah.
correct.
And they don't even have to wait for John to approve. They just need to send a letter.
So can we vote on this
Okay.
very important point?
Again, I don't see any harm with having the option given to the owner
Voting on the,
to do
Change
either
and
the
or.
arborist or
We're voting on Mr. Capelli's
more
commitment.
qualified arborist.
Let's vote on that because it seems y'all are going beyond that.
I think so too, exactly. Okay, do you have a motion on that?
Change and or.
It's already on the
Change
table.
and or.
To change
To
and to
or.
or. Yeah.
They have a motion for that?
And seconded.
Okay. Then all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Nay,
No opposed?
nay,
no, we're.
Oh,
because we
speak
wanted
up,
to
speak
check.
up. Okay.
All three of y'all are opposed?
No, I'm okay with it.
Okay, those, you got two down there?
Five
Okay,
nay, 2 nay.
right.
I just want to make sure who's two nays.
Yeah. Okay, moving right along.
I have another question on page 2 for clarification. Item 6, at the top of the page,
What page?
It's 2.
2. Is governmental agency equivalent, or is KICA on Kiowa equivalent to a governmental agency?
No.
No,
No.
private.
Okay.
Private company.
So we're not talking about KICA removing items alongside the setback areas along streets and other areas where, I guess, the major part of that whole is to protect the areas alongside the right-of-way.
No, this section would not apply to Kika. This is.
So they can do what they want,
So-
do what they want, subject to this regulation.
No, they would be subject to the ordinance, not just
Right,
free-handed,
All
free
right,
fall.
so it's clear in everybody's mind that KICA is not a governmental agency.
That's correct.
Okay? That was my question.
Would it make sense for clarity, kind of to Andy's point, to say tree work completed by utility companies, electric suppliers, KICA, or governmental agencies? Would that make it clear that KICA is required?
I would think
This
so.
is an exception to the rule. So if you want Kika to have an exception to that, then that's what this is asking for.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I personally don't, I'm just asking the question.
So if this is not giving Kika an exception, this is,
Right.
if you guys would like Kika to have an exception, then we can add that to this.
No, I personally don't.
I don't think,
Should we make it clear that KICA is not a governmental agency is a better way to ask it in my case?
I think that.
Kika's not, they're,
probably no.
You don't
they're a
think it's
homeowners
necessary, okay.
association.
I think it's pretty known
fine.
what they're.
That's fine.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
Are there others?
I have to I guess we should wait to discuss.
Oh, on the following sections? Okay. Anything in this, the section 129 as being proposed, the tree ordinance itself. If not, then we can call a question for the amendment for the approval as amended.
I move that we approve the recommendation of the town council of the ordinance as amended.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
Okay, one no. It passes 6-1.
So the next section is 12-162, which refers to site plan review process. In addition to the actual framework of the ordinance, there are other sections of our code that we are amending to ensure consistency. And so this just adds under site plan review process that tree surveys, tree preservation plans, or landscape plans would be required based on this particular ordinance within the site plan review process.
Move we amend the site plan review section 16162 1B, and if it's not the intent of the ordinance to include single-family detached residential, we remove that entire section B.
Hold
It says it will not apply.
Oh,
The amendment needs to be, the amendment to the ordinance needs to have a motion and a second before we start amending the amendment.
Started a discussion on this section.
No, just having a motion first to
I
begin
thought we
that,
did.
so.
We voted.
This is the section 162, so can I just have a motion to approve as amended, and then we'll go into your specific
What was the
comments.
last motion we just approved?
that was 12-129. Correct, John?
Correct.
Correct.
Tree ordinance, 129.
Yeah.
Right.
This is
And
12.
we're now on
That was-
12-162.
Approved, 6-1.
Uh-huh.
All right, now what?
We just need a motion to open up if you want to be able to have amendments to this. So if someone can make a motion
You wanna
to
approve
amend.
it?
I move that we approve section 12162, site plan review.
Second.
Now,
I'd like to make a
All right,
motion that we.
discussion first.
We gotta have a motion.
We had motion and we had a second.
Okay,
And Joe said we had to have the discussion before we vote, so.
Andy?
before you vote, I'd like to make a motion to amend,
Well, we got a motion on the table now.
No, this is,
No,
he's moving to
He
amend.
can make a motion to amend.
Okay.
Yeah, he can make a motion.
to remove section B if the intent is not to include single-family detached residential.
Well, I don't think that, for example, this is the site plan review process, has nothing to do with the tree ordinance that we
Ooh.
put in there.
Thank you.
This
Thank
sets
you.
separately.
So you are intending that single-family be included?
It's already part of the, this is
not
what they do
apply.
using now. This is the site plan review procedure that they're using now.
this is our current site plan review process. What this does is outline, as you see, the applicability that our
However,
standard.
planning staff to determine, a review by planning staff to determine compliance will be required.
Andy, if you strike that, then the planning department doesn't have a process to be able to issue a
family
building
residential
permits.
projects, correct.
Not a building permit.
So if, to follow Mr. Iwan's point, if that particular section is struck from this section, we would not have something in our code that administers how we review single-family residential projects.
So does anyone second Mr. Capelli's?
You have building departments that issue permits.
Point of
They have their
order.
own regulations.
I think we had a second.
No, we have no second.
There's
We have
no
a second?
yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it, just so we vote on it.
Okay. And we've had our discussion.
Is there any discussion?
Unless there's additional discussion.
Can we just pause? So Ms. Reynolds has the actual motion on here. There's a motion on the floor to strike section B, made by Mr. Capelli, second by Mr. Farrell.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
We're on the same page.
The amendment.
I'm sorry, yeah.
I've got that far. These minutes are gonna be fun.
Okay,
Are there
no,
any other discussion? And
I have a question. Why does the process not talk about multifamily or commercial?
it's included, it's just, single-family is included in the overall site plan review process. It's just making an exception for single-family residential.
The only change, this is 12-162, which is on the books. The only change is what's in red is that we're adding the tree.
Correct. That's the only,
That's the
that's
only
the only
change
thing changed over.
that's the reason for this
Let's
being
deal
on
with
our agenda.
Let's deal with the, do we vote? We've got a
Motion
motion
now.
to amend a vote, and so you should call for the question.
okay, and we've had our discussion? Agree? Okay, all those in favor approving? Mr. Capelli's motion to eliminate B on section 12-162, page,
I'd like to withdraw
two.
my motion.
okay?
Second is withdrawal.
Okay. Are there others? If not, then we can call for the question on the,
I move that we amend, oh, we've got that, we
As-
got that already out there. We got that
We
already out
can
there.
call for a vote now.
Yeah.
Go for the vote.
Discussion's done? All those in favor of approval?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
all right, so there are two more sections. One is section 165, under zoning permits. This essentially adds tree removal as one of the requirements to be able to obtain the zoning permit, just section K as you see as written, as red line.
I move that we accept Section 12-165 as presented.
Second.
yeah, guys, you need to bring your microphones up, all of you, so we can hear you. Please, thank you. Repeat that, Joanne, if you would, please, I didn't hear you.
I made a motion that we accept Section 12-165 as presented.
Okay, she's got a motion to accept it as amended. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a question. Under any earth disturbing activity, isn't there somewhere, maybe it's in a tree ordinance where it says 25%? Or there's a number associated with earth disturbing activity? Am I remember that correctly, or? So this is any. So if like I go out and plant a bush, do I need a permit or?
No,
Yep.
you wouldn't need a permit to go just,
But do we need to qualify that, or can I just go plant bushes?
As I recall, the percentage you're talking about, didn't that have to do with how close it was to,
Protecting a grand tree,
it was protecting grand trees that you
Spe-
couldn't
spe- spe-
disturb within a certain,
specimen trees,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I remember now.
because you don't want the roots to be.
Right, okay, thank you.
I'd like to propose an amendment to the proposal. That is to, in the first line or the first sentence, the purpose of the zoning permit is for non-single-family residential to conform it with the intended fuller use. And that, I think, Ron is, goes back to Ron's comment earlier, specific with the ordinance.
so I just want to be clear that that changes the entire intent of this section for zoning permits, that we would not have any administer approval for anything non-single-family residential based on what you was just shared. So this section covers everything of how we would, what is required for a zoning permit. So a zoning permit today, this list is an exhaustive list of when a zoning permit would be required. So I would not recommend
What,
the motion that was just made.
all right, you're talking about a site plan, you're talking about a permit to approve a site plan. Now you're talking about a permit for zoning? It's already, the zone has already been determined.
No,
It's
this is
already
a-
on the
this-
books. We're
this
just
is a-
adding
This
tree
is our
removal.
existing zoning permit section. This is on the books today. This is not a new section.
Andy, just look at B and C, it's for new
So the
construction.
only one is K is you change?
that's the only change.
So you still want to make that correct?
No, withdraw that.
He's withdrawing it.
I don't know whether relocation of a house, where that applies on Kiowa, but that's all right. Installation of any sign, I can understand with the site during construction, but if you want to put it in the zoning permit, go ahead.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the amended for
We already did.
Motion is every single.
165, 12-165?
Discussion or amendment?
Okay, then we're ready to vote. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No,
Okay, 6-1.
The final section is section 374. I did not include the entire brevity, the entire section, because this is just adding in definitions or clarifying existing definitions. And so, once this goes before our adoption process, this will be inserted into all the definitions in the section 12-374. Yeah. So if this would just be amending to include these definitions into the section 12-374.
I move that we accept these changes for Section 12-374.
Really, it's not changes, it's just additions, right?
Additions, excuse me.
So the whole thing really should be read, correctly, right? 'Cause this is all
Everything
new.
everything in that first section,
Liz.
that has this asterisk by it, those would be new definitions included. The things that were below were existing in our code today that was kind of a reference, so you're really only voting on those things in that first section.
I second.
Okay, first and a second. Discussion?
I have a discussion.
You got a discussion, Ron?
Yeah, I think there's an inconsistency in the protected tree definition. So, back in the ordinance, we refer to protected trees as anything greater than 8 inches DH. And here you've got a tree with a diameter of 24 inches or greater, excluding pine, and any tree 8 inches or greater, but only in buffer or landscape areas. So I don't think that's consistent with the ordinance.
So
Yeah, we
would-
eliminated pines, palms, and sweet gums, didn't we?
So we would, is a recommendation to change that protected tree to essentially the language that's listed on page 7, number B, of grand trees, anything greater than 24 inches, and live oak trees greater than 16, or
I think that's,
like the collective of those two sections, I'm sorry.
so your specimen tree
74, yeah,
in
what
the definitions is appropriate, and the grand tree is
definition in,
appropriate. I think it's just where you get to protected trees.
I'm trying to-
Is in page 7, C1,
he's defining
So-
protected tree
terms.
is anything greater than
Gotcha,
8 inches.
okay.
And in the definitions, you put other restrictions.
So if you can just make the motion to change that language to any tree with a
Here's the
diameter breast height
existing
of 8 inches or greater.
Says they're existing. Place else.
Change it to make it consistent with the ordinance.
Saying
I'm
it's
sorry,
in
are we,
the-
what do
it's
we,
in the
say that
draft.
again, what do we change it to?
So
Changing the motion.
definition of protected trees on this amendment, or 12-374, is inconsistent with the definition of protected trees in the ordinance.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but what are we changing it to?
I think we need to just change it to the same definition as what's in the ordinance. So that would be 8 inches or greater, and it wouldn't be specified into buffer, so it's
Okay,
8
so-
inches, 8 inches or greater.
So you have to put a period after greater and then eliminate the rest of it,
Yeah, so it's any tree with a diameter breast height at 8 inches or greater.
period.
Period.
And then the rest of it is struck.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So you make a motion, you make an amendment.
I make a motion to amend the definition of protected trees, 12-374, to be consistent with the ordinance, so that the diameter, protected tree would be defined as any tree with a diameter breast height of 8 inches or greater.
Second.
Get a second? Okay, we have a motion to amend the definitions, as Ron had detailed, and we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Good. John?
That concludes oh, I'm sorry, one more. Oh, sorry, that's the amendment. You're right.
Now, before you jump to that question, are you really saying invasive species are any tree that's not native?
No.
You can't bring in a tree that grows in Florida?
No, we're having a chart which has invasive species, because I remember when we had the tree guy, we were asking like, oh, I've planted fruit trees, those aren't native, but they're not invasive.
Right.
Tallow trees are invasive, for example, you can't plant a tallow tree because that's an invasive species. So we refer to whatever, was it Clemson, John? What's our official chart of invasive species?
Clemson Extension is the official chart that we're using. And I'm trying to find a section that it's listed in where we had that in the ordinance.
Yeah, I saw when they listed it.
So on page 8, the purpose regarding invasive species is so that those aren't considered in any development plans. What we just mentioned, like the tallow tree, those types of things. So this wouldn't be something that's necessarily not a non-South Carolina original plant, but it's an invasive thing.
I understand
Yeah.
what Joanne said. What I'm suggesting is, isn't that a little too broad? I mean, the fact is, there are trees out there that are not dangerous, not going to cause economic harm, that you can bring in and use to grow, but they would fit the definition because they're not native.
No, it means South Carolina and cause economic harm. So you can bring in a tree from Georgia that's not native here, as long as it doesn't cause economic harm.
Or harm to human health.
Or, that's the
So
or. but-
if you guys want to be a little bit more clear in that section, we can just take the language that's listed in page 8 of the ordinance and add it to
The first sentence is the same.
yeah.
All you have to do
Just
is
adding
add the second
adding the second sentence.
And all of these other terms that you say existing definitions appear somewhere in where?
Those are in our current definition
In
section.
the ordinance itself?
There's a definition section.
129.
No,
374.
In our zoning code, 12-374 is definitions. So the ones that aren't asterisked are already in there.
Is there a second
So
to,
did we make a
I mean-
motion to amend 12-374 to add the second sentence from the ordinance to invasive species?
you can,
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Back to the original motion as amended twice.
I make a motion that we approve the motion as amended.
Second.
Well, we've already made that motion. It's all done. It's
Okay.
any more discussion or amendments? If not, we can go straight to the vote.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Wait a minute, Andy's,
1224-1. Is that the one you just,
We're
that's the
just
next-
finishing
that's the next-
12-374.
That's the next one.
There you go.
we're not there yet?
okay,
What I thought.
back to the vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now you can
Yeah, so 12-24.1, this is just essentially the framework that would establish a tree preservation board for the town. Outlines the administrative and rules of procedure notions that the board would be responsible for adopting its own rules of procedures, and then the functions and powers. I'll just review what those are. The the Tree Preservation Board would have the ability to hear and approve with conditions, or disapprove applications of special circumstances regarding tree removal as determined by the planning director, as well as here approve with conditions, or disapprove variance requests from strict interpretation of the tree preservation standards in this code. And then also, the Tree Preservation Board may propose such legislation based on this ordinance that would essentially make their jobs a little bit easier. So those are the three sort of functions and powers of this particular board. This would kind of model, just to give you an example, this would model the Board of Zoning Appeals in their structure of being independent body of approval decisions. And so any applicant who may feel that the ordinance has been too strict in application, they can request that Tree Preservation Board hear that case and make a determination. So this is I don't foresee that this would be a board that's often used today, but maybe there is. But this is an attempt to us to have a higher level of scrutiny for very special circumstances. And as listed, one of the things that maybe you want to comment on is just, and this can be determined at a later date as well, but right now it's listed as 5 members. The design professionals in their comments always have informed us they wanted to ensure that design professionals or folks who have expertise in these areas are provided. So this shows that it's a mixture of both design professionals and residents who make up the context of that board. That can be something that you guys discuss as part of this as well.
And I'm going to reverse my earlier comment. In this case, suggest that we change the heading, Landscape and Tree Preservation Board, assuming you intend to have a landscape ordinance, and you also intend at some future date to apply the rules of the ordinance to the request of the or Landscape and Tree Preservation Board for instances where there are strict interpretations that are objected to.
Do we need a motion and a second before we?
We do. I have a question. I have whether or not he wants to change it. That's his intent.
I move that we accept 12-24.1 for approval.
Second.
Okay, and discussion we had? Discussion, any further discussion?
Well, and
I
he's
have
going to
an
make a motion now.
amendment to
Amend.
change the title of Section 1224-1, the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board, to be consistent with previous discussion and information.
I second.
Okay. We can vote. Okay,
I meant, it's just a title. I don't have any preference one way or the other. The original intent was really just primarily tree removal, but I mean, it just
it's
makes it a little bit more
fine.
cumbersome.
It's
But
good.
so
You
I don't.
You just don't want to change anything that's in writing as long as it's inconsistent. You know, we've gone through this whole thing, and all I'm getting is, I don't want to change because it's not consistent.
well, let's not go down that path.
My only question was, I wasn't clear what the actual
Motion was to change the section header opposed to Tree Preservation Board being Landscape and Tree Preservation Board. And I was just, that's what I understood the motion to be,
Yes, that was
correct?
his
Change
motion.
it to Landscape and Tree Preservation
And
Board.
my comments were just that it's,
Part of the
to me,
discussion.
it's really not I don't have a preference in any of that. It's just
I
the title of the,
second
title of the board.
I second it.
Second.
Can
Any-
we discuss, or do we have to move, just vote
And
on
now we're dealing with this motion,
Right,
this amendment? This-
Mr. Capelli's motion to amend.
okay. No other further discussion? Then all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, you got 2 noes. Petra? Okay,
I'd like to suggest an amendment that, and I would take direction from the board, that we have at least one planning commissioner permanently on the Tree Preservation Board. And the reason I suggest that is there are 3 very qualified people who spend a lot of time defining what we're trying to accomplish, both in broad strokes and in specific strokes. And I think a planning commissioner would be a great guide to what the intent of and know the details of this regulation. So my recommendation would be to amend this to include one planning commissioner as a permanent office holder on the tree preservation board.
May not want it.
John, you comment on that?
Bill might weigh in, but I think it's a cross of legislation that's my first initial thought of you have two different.
We're not elected, we're appointed.
No, as far as judicial versus being quasi-judicial versus sort of a legislative recommending body. That's my only, we might need to research.
I would agree with you, John. It's similar to BZA and Planning Commission. You wouldn't have
Yeah,
a member
there's
of
a
both.
rule against dual office holding.
Yeah.
And I think that this board has some real powers here. So I'm not sure, you know,
It hasn't been seconded, so you don't, we shouldn't be having discussion until it's seconded or not.
well, I think staff, I mean, you've asked for the input. Well, I'm more than happy to sit down and y'all can second it when y'all are
It may
ready.
not be seconded, so.
Okay, and we've heard from council giving us direction on that, on maybe why we shouldn't do it, but you
Want
should,
to withdraw it, Luke, or you still want to make the
you're going to
motion?
hold your motion?
I'll leave it out there and see if anybody seconds it. and,
Okay, we have a second on that? We have no second. Okay,
No second.
no
Okay.
second.
John, in section B, number 1, I suggest that through an amendment that we change the term resident member to be consistent with state law.
Section B.
B as in boy.
On the term, the
Page 1.
last sentence in the section deals with the term resident member and contains a definition that's inconsistent with state law.
I don't know. So what would that definition in state law?
Basically says if you intend to return to your place of abode after being absent for a time, you're a resident.
So this, we can research it, but this comes directly from our current code. Not to say it can't be inconsistent, but maybe if we want to potentially maybe table this or have research more, I think the intent here is to make sure that those who are primarily on Kiowa most of the year.
Yes.
To make sure, so that's the
Yeah,
intent, so
to make
maybe it
them
needs to be
available.
rewritten. Yeah, so that's the real intent here.
Does that apply to any other ordinance we have?
Our Board of Zoning Appeals.
Sorry?
Our Board of Zoning Appeals has the same language.
Board of Zoning and Appeal?
Correct.
Any others?
I can't think of, you meant other committees in the town? I'm not sure right
How
now.
about town council?
Be residents.
You have to be
They
a
have to
resident.
be a
You have to be
resident to be on town
Correct.
Have to be a resident,
Correct.
Right.
You have to vote in South
not a
Carolina.
resident member, a resident.
It's, the resident member refers to the member of the board, so it's a resident member of the board. That's how this is reading.
So it's different than the town council.
Town council's a municipal organization, and,
The resident definition in the state is different than what you have here.
yeah, but this isn't
So if a
referring to
resident is a
resident.
member of town council, it's different than what you have here.
Right, because this isn't referring to resident, it's talking about what a resident member is for the purpose of this board.
So what I'm asking, why would we not make, if we have a requirement to have a resident member, why don't we have it here?
We want to make sure on this board that whoever's on it is available to meet. So we want people who are here at least 8 months here for purposes of this board. It's,
So why
doesn't relate.
arbitrarily 8 months is better than a resident?
Well, I think what you're referring to, Andy, as a resident is based on who's paying in-state versus out-of-state taxes for the primary residents.
Right.
I think we can.
But that's the only definition of resident in the
Yeah,
state
but
code.
I think we can get around that and decide what we feel a full-time person should be as far as having the ability to be called upon when needed, and I think that's
Well, we're defining it.
John is saying.
We are defining it. The
Yeah.
term resident member means a person who resides permanently for 8 months.
Fine. It's different than the state law.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
I don't think there's an obligation that we have to be exactly like the state.
That's fine. You don't want to, don't do it.
Okay.
But the fact is, we require it for our council. Why not require it here?
Actually, I think for council, it's probably, they have to be a resident for voting, and that's just a little over 6 months.
6 months in a day.
6 months in a day to be a voting, to be a, a regular South Carolina resident. It has nothing to do with
I don't even think it's 6 months to a
what,
day. I think it's returning to your place of abode.
I don't think we need to argue that here. I think we're
Okay.
clear on what we want to do here.
We don't have a motion yet to establish the board.
There is a motion has been established at board. We have an approved amendment to change the title to Landscape and Tree Preservation Board. So if there aren't any other amendments, we can adopt as
Can I
amended.
just ask a question? Other than the BZA used as a model, were there other municipalities that you look to that have a similar kind of tree board as this?
Yes, so just in general, I'll step back a tad here. The Tree Preservation Board, I use the BZA, but other municipalities have sometimes even limited or less narrow scope than here. They're only looking at tree removal, so any grand tree that may be considered removed, that's their only scope of work that they're looking at. So I looked at a few different examples of other municipalities. This was just crafted based on some of the comments that we've heard throughout this workshop and this process.
I just had one discussion. One of the outside comments was, doesn't conflict with the.
Where that caliber deep
goes in there. You should consider having an architect, a landscape architect, and an arborist involved.
I went back and forth on that. What's listed is design professionals and 5 members. Like, we could
We have to replace a tree with at
designate
least a
maybe
3-inch tree.
1 architect, 2, I didn't want to go that level of detail, but maybe that's spelled out in the
Yeah, I understand.
rules of procedure opposed to the ordinance. So,
Like I said, there's no conflict.
To change
yeah.
what was written.
The biggest thing for me is just having some design professionals on that board, and I think the design community would be appreciated to be tapped in as a resource for that too, so.
Okay. We do have a motion. We have a second.
We amended, as amended.
As amended. Okay, we've discussed it. All those in favor, say aye.
What are we voting on right now?
The adoption
Accepting
of the
the tree
Preservation Board.
Preservation Board.
With the amended.
Title change, okay, yes.
Correct. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Just a brief question, and again, John, it deals with the Preservation Board. As a member, maybe I'm asking the wrong person. As a planning commissioner member of the Tree Preservation Board, how do you define strict? In the ordinance, you have to have a strict interpretation can be
So-
challenged.
So.
Who defines that? It's subjective?
What this does is if an applicant, let's just say, presents a plan for development and it does not meet the requirements of our tree preservation standards, they can essentially go and request that this tree preservation board hears that case and make a decision based on whatever factors they may seem reasonable that it does not meet those standards.
Strict is subjective. Leaves it to somebody to say, oh, you don't meet the requirements.
Yeah, so,
Somebody comes in and says, oh, I do, and here's how I do it.
so they would make their
And you
case to the tree
decide
preservation.
against it, and you say, and somebody says it's a strict interpretation.
So if there's, let me just step back even further. So if someone comes in for a site development plan, planning staff will review that, make sure that it is consistent with the ordinance. Let's just say hypothetically, it's not consistent with the ordinance. We can advise that applicant, hey, you can make revisions to this plan to make it consistent with the ordinance. Or if you feel that you have a case, you can go to the Tree Preservation Board and argue that case that, hey, we believe that the ordinance is applied too strictly to make that approval. So essentially, they would go to this board for consideration for review, opposed to it meeting the actual letter of law of the ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've done all the work that we needed to do. And we've almost been here for almost 2 hours. So why don't we move on?
I think we should. John, you got any new business?
There's no new business. I will just make some very brief staff comments just regarding our comprehensive plan. I have some working documents that have been shared with me. I'm redlining those. This include, since the last time we met, specific data points regarding elements. And so I'm going to share that with you all. I want you to just kind of review them. If you have questions, let us know. And then once we reconvene, more than likely in the new year, based on the timing, we'll have a formal review of the next steps. But these include being able to couple the quantitative and qualitative things that we've already mentioned based on our last review. We didn't receive any substantive comments based on the goals and objectives. I thought we were in a good place there from the last time we shared that information with you. So this will be coupled with those goals and objectives, and I think we're one step closer. The only other things I'll highlight, just overall, regarding area development, the town, based on yesterday, you might have heard some conversation, town council, the medical village that's being proposed on Betsy Carrison Parkway, that's going before Charleston County Planning Commission, public hearing for county council. And so the town will be providing some information in our e-blast regarding that to inform the community. There are, I know that there's been questions around Beach Walker. Those are still under site plan review, those two projects. We are engaging with our third-party consultant, going back and forth on some questions that they've had in there as they review. As we get more information, we'll inform the community of those two particular projects. But council has been doing a good job of updating the status of those that we've provided to council. So just keep your ears open, eyes open for those particular processes. Regarding next year, our first maybe order of business outside of comprehensive plan will be beginning to look holistically at our zoning code. That has not been done since I've been on staff. And so there are things in areas, different sections that we want to be able to clean up. And so that'll be our next big project in 2024.
Thank you, John. Any further public comments? If not, we'll go to commissioner comments, and we'll start with Dr. Kern. Any comments?
Nothing to add.
Thank you. Joanne?
Nothing.
Madeline?
I do have something, but since everybody's packing up, I'll keep it really short.
All right, go ahead.
Number one, I think it is time, John, to make sure that we've got an update on the comprehensive plan as part of our next working agenda. It's been a couple of months since we've had an update, and I think we need to focus attention on that again. We've had a lot of other things that have been priorities. I did want to report on one other additional council action yesterday, or at least review, and this pertains to the marsh management plan. The committee had taken a proposal on the bridge to town council, and there were three various options that were examined. The one that had been proposed by the full committee was to at least consider the construction of a ramp. So as you're leaving Kiowa, you're leaving the island on the right side of the parkway before the bridge, you have all the parking places. Well, there would be a proposed ramp that would come off to the right side of that and head down to the marsh with some platforms and perhaps some benches that would allow for fishing and for crabbing. Town council put that on the back burner. Feeling that there were a lot of safety issues and there were a lot of enforcement issues. That at this point, we're basically sent back to, and there were also some concerns that were expressed by the Conservancy. So we're going back to the drawing board on that and meeting again real soon. So we'll report back to you guys on the status of that. And then, as referenced a couple of times, The new ARB plan has been released to the community, and it's pretty intense, it's complicated, it's complex. It requires some reading by all of us, and the committee would really appreciate your candid feedback. So take a look at it, please provide us with constructive feedback, because you guys have a unique perspective that will be extremely helpful in helping us to make further revisions to that. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Mr. Iwan, any comments?
The only comment I'll make is that when Mr. Wilson said this board, or the tree preservation board, is going to have real power, not like you guys. So it kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit. But thanks to, thanks, Joe. Okay, that's all I had.
Okay. Luke, any comments?
Just again, a quick thank you to John and to the tree subcommittee for all the work they've done on this ordinance. So thank you.
Mr. Capelli?
Don't forget Jen.
To answer Joanne's question earlier, Joanne, if you want to look on page 11, footnote number 7, the use of the caliper and DBH in the same sentence is the same, and you may want to consider recommending to John that you change that before it's finalized. Secondly, and just to follow up on the comments regarding the marsh management plan recommendation, item or option 1 was included in there because the ramp, the money that came to extend the roadway, widen the roadway, build the cutoff, et cetera, came from the Greenbelt funds with the condition that we allowed fishing and crabbing. We hope to eliminate that. Option 2 is the favored one of the subcommittee, so that there would be no access to the marsh, if you will, or the river from the platform. The other part of the platform was basically viewing for the use of artists, picture taking, et cetera, use of the view from a pleasure standpoint, but not to allow for fishing, kayaking, or anything else on the marsh or in the marsh. The other question that came up was whether or not we considered the ramp, if you will, or the platform on both sides of the road. And the answer was clearly we considered it. And the main objection was we're trying to preserve the marsh. Right now, the problem we're going to face is keeping people off the marsh. With the ramp on the other side, we are also already finding people using the other side and damaging the marsh to fish and escape the limitation, if you will, on the right side where we're trying to restore the marsh. It's already been damaged. Put a ramp on the other side, you'll just exacerbate that and consider a larger problem later on with the damage that would occur. So option 2 was the one we recommended, but we do have a greenbelt problem to consider, and unless they either eliminate or change the terms of the original grant, we may have to put that extension out there to let people crab and fish. But the intent was to eliminate any activity on the marsh to maintain and preserve the marsh.
Andy, I think you should also note there is a movement, and I think by some in the Conservancy, to eliminate the parking, redo the landscaping and give the money, the Greenbelt money back so that there is no access, because there's concern that the access is mostly off-island people. If you lived on the island and didn't use it, you couldn't answer the survey. So the survey was well, we'll leave it, that it was not the best of surveys. So there is discussion about possibly surveying people on Kiowa to see if they even want any parking or access on the bridge, because people make U-turns. It's a big safety issue there.
You know, we've, as you know, the first survey was done, and that's basically what the conclusion was anyway. The Greenbelt hasn't been approached yet. We don't know if it's even possible to buy it or pay it off or whatever you want to call it. The fact is, right now, we're faced with the prohibition of blocking that area from fishing and crabbing under the terms of the Greenbelt loan or Greenbelt grant. And we have the same problem essentially that comes with the Conservancy receiving the property owned by Keo Partners that has been turned over for conservation easements that they have to, they have certain restrictions that they have to follow, and we want to make sure that they're not violated either. So a lot depends on, one, what DHEC says, what the ultimate conclusions of both the partners' lease legally allows or doesn't allow, and also from the Greenbelt.
Mr. Chairman. I
So we
move
got
that
some legal issues, but we got a lot of things to consider before we agree on it.
Thank you.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Second, all those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.